Hello everybody, what's up, and welcome to the channel where we learn to be true heroes in the world of Overwatch. Today I have another little theory chat with you guys, but this one's a little bit less theoretical and a lot more practical. Now, a couple days ago I did one on hero roles, and that one was specifically done in preparation for this one, talking about team composition. So if you haven't seen that one yet, I do suggest that you go check that out. It'll give you a little bit of an intro, a little bit of a background before we come into what we're going to be talking about today, which is team composition. What exactly does a team need to be successful in an unorganized, solo queue-esque environment? Now, if you want an organized competitive team comp, you can just tune into any tournament and copy NIP, NVS, or any of those teams and be fine. But I'm talking specifically about ranked to help you guys out, because you can't run sort of the interesting, eccentric teams that a more organized team can run because you just don't have the practice or the teamwork to pull a lot of those things off. You need more of a balanced team that has certain essential factors to maximize your strengths and minimize your weaknesses. So this video is all about those factors. Now, the first one is damage. And let me clarify real quick that I'm talking purely about hero picks, not about the skills of the players. If your team has 4 DPS and none of them can hit their shots or do any damage, your team doesn't have a damage problem. It's just like a general, your DPS doesn't have enough skill. You should still pick. You should always pick to have a good team composition. You shouldn't be like, oh, yeah, we might already have 2 DPS, but they suck, so I'm going to go DPS 2. This is a little bit of a tangent, but it's only going to be maybe 15 seconds. You have to trust in your teammates to do their roles. If you do that, you will climb. If you perform your role as well as you can compared to your equivalent on the other team, you will climb. You have to trust your team. If you go out and you say, oh, well, my team is bad, so I have to play non-standard, I have to play like badly to make up for it, that's just going to make things worse. If you trust your team and play very well, then on average, you will climb. And as far as you know, maybe your DPS players didn't show up this fight, but maybe next fight, they'll play a lot better. People have tons of variation in how they play, even in the same game. So always play for the team comp. Don't play for the overall what you think is wrong with the team. If you already have 2 or 3 DPS, but there's not enough damage being put out, don't just assume that it's the DPS player's fault and be like, oh, I'm going to pick DPS too. Always go for a balanced team. Anyway, now that that's out of the way, let's move on to what I was talking about. So like I was saying before, damage. You need enough raw damage per second to actually kill the enemy team. Now, the average team has about 1,500, 1,600 health. And if you take into account the healing, you need to have enough damage to actually kill them. Now, if they have more healing, if they have like triple support running 3-3 or something like that, you need more damage to overcome that. If they have less healing, maybe if you're in a lower skill tier and it's more common to have no supports or something like that, and they have no healing, you don't need as much damage because they don't have as much sustain. But honestly, this first point is pretty simple. I'm pretty sure most of you know what I'm talking about, so I'm just going to move on. By the way, these are in order of importance. So when you're looking for what your team needs, start at the top here, damage, number 1 priority, and then go down the list I'm about to give. The next thing, and this one is following pretty close behind, is initiation. Have you ever been on Hanamura is a good example. You're just sitting there and you can't get past the choke. Like you literally, maybe you're playing a support or a DPS or something, and you just can never walk up. You can never have any impact because there's no initiation to get past the choke point. Even if you have enough damage, if you don't have any way to actually initiate to start the fight, there's no way you can even leverage that damage. So initiation is just very, very close behind actually having enough damage to begin with. And I'll go over some hero picks and specific examples and stuff a little bit later, but for now, I'm just setting out the framework for you guys. The next one, and now we're getting into a little bit more interesting territory that maybe isn't so obvious to you, is defensive ult outs. You need to have some sort of out to your opponent's ults. So here, let me give you an example. Let's take a look at this team comp. Now, at first glance, it actually doesn't look too bad because, yeah, we only have 1 healer in the Ana, but she's quite a strong healer. And Roadhog and Soldier have their own sustain, so it kind of takes the pressure off anyway. We don't need as much heals. Zarya is a good tank to absorb damage. She has her barriers, and they have so it looks like they have plenty of damage, plenty of tanking, they have healing, and of course they're on defense, so Symmetra is strong, let's say on the first point of a control point map. But they don't have any answers to offensive ultimates. Now, if you look, if they were to get Graviton Surged by maybe an enemy Zarya, they're dead. They have no way to stop it at all. They're 100% dead. If they get Earth Shattered by Reinhardt, very few ways, if any, to stop it. Even like a Genji Blade or just anything like that, any of those big offensive ults are almost unstoppable. If you don't have good outs to your opponent's big ults, then you're just going to lose every single fight they have their ults up, and that's unacceptable whether you're on offense or defense. So in this case, you'd either need to have the Ana be a Mercy so that she could stand back and come in and res after those big ults, that would be an out, or you would change the Symmetra to like a Zenyatta or a Lucio or something, which would be another good way to out those ultimates. Now, it doesn't have to be a Lucio or a Zenyatta or a Mercy either. It doesn't have to be an ultimate. A Reinhardt outs Graviton Surge pretty well, not all the time, but most of the time his shield can block a good chunk of the damage that comes in. D.Va stops a lot of ults herself, so it doesn't have to be your own ult. You know, there's tons of different ways. Be creative, pick what you want, but make sure that if you ask yourself the question, what happens when they Graviton Surge us? If the answer is we just die, you should definitely address that immediately. Next up, we have Sustain. So healers are very strong in this game, very efficient. One healer does more healing than one DPS does DPSing over the course of an entire fight if everything plays out properly. But it's not just healers. Heroes like Zarya and Reinhardt, who can absorb damage from the other team, is pretty much the same as healing as well. So that's all sustain. So if you're out damaging the other team, but they're still beating you, that means that your damage to sustain ratio on your team is not weighted enough towards the sustain side. So of course the most obvious ones are the healers, but also just having generally more HP or damage mitigation like a Reinhardt, a Zarya, D.Va, things like that also contribute. The last thing you need, and this is listed last, so it's the lowest priority, but all of these are very important, is defensive ultimate outs. Now this is pretty much the opposite of offensive ultimate outs. Now imagine that your Zarya uses her ultimate on the other team. A pretty standard counter is for them to pop their Zenyatta ultimate. And what you can do from there is just an example. You could throw an Ana grenade, which would anti-heal them. So you're essentially countering their out to your Zarya ultimate. Now, if you just let them always out your ultimates every single time, it's going to be very ineffective, and you're also just going to always get shut down. Now, Ana grenade on Zenyatta ultimate is probably the most classic one, but there are many more. Let me think of some. So there's McCree, who can flashbang over a Reinhardt shield, so your team can earth shatter. You have Mei, who can freeze through a Lucio ultimate, freeze through a Zenyatta ultimate. McCree counters Zenyatta ultimate because he one-shots them. He counters Mercy ultimate because he charges on them while they're resurrecting. Don't go out of your way for it, remember, lowest priority, but if you have a chance to counterpick one of their defensive ultimates, that could be very, very strong for your team. Now, as I said, a couple days ago, I made a video about hero roles. I didn't make that just because I like arbitrarily assigning names to things and organizing things for no reason. I made that because it fits very nicely and it's a good intro into team composition, the stuff that I just went over. So if you haven't seen that, again, I'm going to urge you to go check it out because I'm going to be referencing it in this next section. So of course, this chart isn't going to 100% personify every hero into their tiny little categories because Overwatch is more complex than that. But starting from right to left, and I'm not going to go over it in depth again because I already made a video about it, but in general, the offensive healers are going to help you with the initiation and the sustain. The defensive healers are going to help you with the sustain and also have outs to their offensive ultimates. Now, of course, Zenyatta has some damage, Ana has some damage, Lucio can kind of out ultimates with his sound barrier, but we're just talking in general terms here. Supports, Torbjorn and Symmetra have a little bit of everything, a little bit of sustain, a little bit of damage, maybe even a little bit of initiation. Symmetra has a little bit of ult negation because they can just come back with a teleporter. And then we have initiators who are obviously good with initiation, tanks who are good at sustain, spammers who are really high DPS, DPS who have mid-tier DPS, but also some other utility. Like McCree can counter defensive ults, he can counter the Reinhardt shield, he can counter offensive ults, he can knock Roadhog out of his ult, he can knock Genji out so that it's easy to kill him. Now, flankers are the most interesting class because by themselves they don't really bring a lot of these things to the table. Sure, Reaper can do some damage if he's in the right position, and all three of them have ultimates that have the potential to make pretty big plays, but in general, they seem kind of underpowered, all other things considered. What they do have, though, is a lot of mobility, a lot of good ways to get to the back line and pick out specific targets. So flankers are good when the other team has one hero that is very important, that's holding some of these key necessities all by themselves. Probably the most iconic example would be a single Mercy on the other team who's fully responsible for all of their sustain and all of their counter ulting. Like, it's her obligation for when your Zarya wipes their team or something, she comes in with a big 5-man res. That's probably the most obvious example of one hero that's really the crux of the enemy team. So in this case, you'd want to have a flanker who is by themselves not that strong compared to other heroes in the game maybe, but can get back there and take out that one very, very important hero and thus earn their value back. Another real quick example is if the other team doesn't have much damage, but they have a single McCree who's like literally doing half of their damage, doing all of their good damage. Having a flanker to take out just that McCree will do a ton of damage to the other team's composition. But anyway, that was just a quick overview of that. Like I said, not all-encompassing, but a good reference sheet just to check out if you're feeling initially lost. But alright, so that's pretty much all I have to say about that, but let's have a few tests. I have 3 little test examples here where I'm going to give you a pub team. I'm going to give you some random solo queue team, probably a really bad team that you'd be relatively unhappy with if you were to queue up for ranked. And I'm going to put 5 heroes out, and you have to pick the best hero to fill in the 6th slot. So here we go. We're going to start on the easiest one and work our way up in difficulty. So here's our first one, classic example. No one picked a healer or a support or anything like that, but which one are we going to get? So pause the video real quick if you need time to think. So we obviously have enough damage because we have 3 pretty hefty DPS heroes. We have okay initiation with the Winston jumping in, the Zarya bubbling him, not too bad. We pretty much don't have any way to counter an offensive ult from them. Like if we get Graviton Surged, pretty much dead at that point. And we obviously have a sustain issue. We have no healer, and we don't really have anything else besides the Zarya bubble for mitigation, but that's definitely not enough, obviously. As far as counters to their defensive ults, we have plenty. Riptire gets through Zenyatta ultimate, McCree can flashbang over the Reinhardt shield, tons and tons of stuff. So we need sustain, and we need a way to get through an offensive ultimate without completely dying. Obviously, we're going to be looking at a healer here, but Anna doesn't have any way to get through offensive ults, so she's out. Zenyatta does, he has Transcendence, but he doesn't really have enough sustain. 30 HP PS with his Harmony Orb is not quite going to cut it. So now we have Lucio and Mercy. So Lucio has pretty okay sustain, not too bad. And he also has Sound Barrier, which can get through offensive ultimates. That's good. And Mercy has, again, sustain, more sustain. So that's good. And she also has a way to get through offensive ultimates with her Resurrect. Now, which one to choose, though? Well, if we look at our team composition, we already have okay initiation. We really, really, really need sustain. And if they have literally any out to Sound Barrier, that's going to be not very effective at actually countering their offensive ultimates. So, again, we need a really hard way to get through offensive ultimates, and we need really hard sustain. So Mercy beats Lucio out in both of these categories. Now, Lucio has better initiation with the speed burst, but we already kind of have that covered with Winston, so that's not as big of a deal. In this case, I would say that the definitive answer here is Mercy. Okay, these are fun. Next one. So here we have Zenyatta, Bastion, McCree, Tracer, and Zarya. Again, if you want a little bit of time to think for yourself, go ahead and pause the video. So I thought that this was sort of the classic Bastion troll, and this team obviously has no problem with damage. We have a ton of damage already on this team, no issue there. Initiation, pretty much none. We have literally no initiation, so that's quite bad. We have pretty good counter to their offensive ultimates. We have Zenyatta, so that's good enough for now. And we are kind of bad with the sustain. Like, we have a little bit with Zenyatta, Zarya has her shields, but we still could definitely use more sustain here. And we do have outs to their defensive ultimates, because Tracer Bomb goes through Zenyatta ultimate, McCree flash over the shield, so not too bad there. So TLDR, we need sustain and initiation. Now, there's a few heroes that actually fit this bill, and all of them are okay choices. I have my own. Now, the first two are Reinhardt and Winston. Both, well, Winston in particular has good initiation with kind of okay-ish sustain. He can sustain himself very well with his ultimate, plus his bubble mitigates damage. Reinhardt, not so good with initiating by himself necessarily, especially with no speed boost, so that's quite poor. But his shield is good mitigation. Then you have Lucio, who obviously has good sustain, very good sustain, and he has speed boost, but if you look at this team, we don't really have any close range. It's all like mid-range, slowly walk up type of team with McCree, Bastion, Zenyatta, Zarya. They're all like mid-range heroes, so the speed boost would actually not help in the initiation factor at all, but he would help with the sustain. Now, the final hero that pops into my mind, and this is my actual choice for this comp, would be Ana. So Ana brings a ton of sustain, completely solves your sustain issue. She can actually keep Bastion alive pretty well. If you nade the Bastion, you heal him for like 200 health per second. If he has a Harmony Orb on, it's like 260. He's like permanently Zenyatta ulted pretty much at that point. So you can actually keep the Bastion alive pretty well. You don't need a Reinhardt for that. Also, she gives you an initiator. So if you ult the Zarya, she can just run in and initiate, tank a bunch of damage. Plus, the big thing here, you actually have another tank on your team. You have a Bastion. He does turn into a tank, and an Ana ulted Bastion, his ultimate is a pretty low cooldown. An Ana ulted Bastion is an amazing initiator. He just goes in there and he's very difficult to stop. So, in this team, I would say Ana. Alright, I want to wrap this up. So one more. This is probably the hardest one, the most gross team. I'm pretty sure anyone would tilt seeing this in ranked solo queue. So this is it. And this team has some issues, I think. Anyway, again, pause if you want to think about it. So on this team, we have pretty much no damage. Symmetra, pretty much no damage. Torbjorn, Zarya, D.Va, no. Winston, no. That's pretty bad. As far as initiation goes, tons of initiation. D.Va, Winston, that's great. Countering offensive ultimates, well, we have the defense matrix, so that's pretty good. We have bubble, okay. We have teleporters from Symmetra, so we have like an okay amount of stuff that can prevent getting wiped by offensive ult. It's not that bad. And then for sustain, well, we obviously don't have a healer, but we do have a lot of hit points on the team. We have Torbjorn armor, we have Symmetra shield. So honestly, I think the sustain isn't super big of an issue. A healer would be nice, but we have a decent amount at this point. Finally, countering defensive ultimates, we pretty much have nothing. Pretty much have nothing that does that. So TLDR, we need damage, hardcore, and maybe a way to counter their defensive ultimates, and maybe some sustain would be nice. Now, this team comp is pretty much a solo queuer's worst nightmare. It's really bad, and nothing you're going to pick is going to make it really good, but you have to fill in what's best. You know, how are you going to make the best of a bad situation? So there's a few okay options, none of which are actually healers. That's right, I know the first instinct is to pick a healer, but if you look, the most urgent priority is damage, and we already actually have not the worst amount of sustain in the entire world. So what are some heroes that would fit the bill? Well, Soldier's one. He's a DPS hero, but he also has a little bit of sustain, so that would be a bad choice. Roadhog would be okay again. He has self-sustain, a little bit of damage, probably not enough though. Pretty much any of the other hard DPS heroes would not be that bad of a choice just to get more damage on the team. But probably my number one pick here that really stands out to me is Mei. Because if you look at the weaknesses on the team, it's damage, a little bit of sustain, and counter ulting. So Mei actually does a pretty okay amount of damage, plus her freezing enables your team to do even more damage. So that's not too bad. Her right clicks actually hurt a decent amount. She has sustain, she has self-sustain. So it takes the pressure off of that. Plus, her ultimate is great at countering other defensive ultimates. You can counter Zenyatta, Lucio, etc., all that stuff. So while nothing is really going to give you a team comp that you can be proud enough to maybe stick on the refrigerator, I think Mei is the best choice out of the entire roster to fill this lineup out. So anyway, I know it was a long video, but it had a lot of information and it really had to be this long to get all the stuff into it that I wanted to get into it. But I hope you guys enjoyed, maybe even had a little bit of fun, learned something. So good luck in solo queue and have a great day. Peace out, guys.